Yeah, when we brainstorm for this, we come up with a lot of different ideas so that we have plenty to work with as far as finding speakers and things. And there was a number of things that we said we should talk about this, but we're probably not going to find anybody to be able to talk for an hour about it, or even a half hour. So that's kind of stuff I want to bring up, and we can just talk back and forth about, so that we're thinking about these. One of them is, for those of you who have a large facility that's seasonal, what do you do with it in the off season? I know over the years I've seen a lot of times that the fairground all of a sudden becomes the self-storage unit, right? You got the big barn, and now you're renting out space for people to bring in their RVs and boats over the winter to store there. You're in a whole new line of business now, and are you looking at your liability for that appropriately is the question, because what do you do there as far as your rental lease contract with them for them to bring in their boat? I had a claim years ago that where the county was doing this. They thought, well, we're going to make some extra money, so they had their fairground barn packed with boats and RVs all winter long. And people loved it because it was really cheap and inexpensive for them to do that. And so the problem was, one of the people didn't follow the rules, and they left their battery in their RV, and their RV, that caused a spark, and their RV started on fire, and all of a sudden, they've got several RVs and boats that are burned. And they're building. And all they had was people would come, drop off their machine, get a ticket, and they'd get, hand them $30 or whatever it was to store their vehicle. They hadn't thought about any of the issues of, if you damage somebody else's equipment, you're going to pay for it. If you damage our building, you're going to pay for it. And all of these things. So that's an issue. The piece that comes into play with this now too is, for larger counties, it's already that type of business that you're going to do on the off season is already governed by statute. You cannot compete with other businesses without, as a government entity, I think it's first and second class counties right now. If you're going to compete with local businesses in any way as a government entity, you must have a plan as far as how you're going to get out of that business, because the legislature does not want you competing with private business. And over again, each session I hear about the legislature, because that was originally first class, Salt Lake. They moved it to second class counties a couple of years ago, and I hear over and over again that they are going to move down the food chain, and smaller counties are going to have to do the same thing to keep us from competing with the local people. Because you can understand, if your family just put a bunch of money into building a self-storage unit, and that was how you were going to pay for the kids' college, and now all of a sudden the county comes in and starts renting space at a third the price you can, right? That doesn't sound right. So consider if you are relying on that income for those other types of operations that you're doing, consider that at some point in time you may have to have a plan to get out of that business, number one, and consider the business you're in and look at what you need to be doing to manage your liability with that type of business. Other things that you guys do that maybe one of your commissioners had a great idea on how to earn some extra money in the off season. It's hard to say no when they come up with those ideas. I can be your friend there and be a naysayer. To let them know that, okay guys, yeah, they can do that, but here's all the things that you need to do. It's not just free. There's things you need to do to be able to conduct that type of business as the county. How many of you are still dealing with ADA compliance?
I mean, we've got 30-year-old facilities that every time we make an improvement, we have to figure
Right. So, again, it's just something to keep track of. I see employers from time to time think that the ADA was something they had to deal with back in the early 90s, and it's just kind of, it's run its course. It hasn't run its course. There's all types of people out there keeping a very close eye on whether or not you're compliant. We've had a problem. We've actually been working at the legislature the last couple of years on a bill because there are law firms now that make a business out of, they'll just drive by to see if your signs are at the right height out in your parking lot. And if they're an inch or two off, they just go and they have people, they go online and have people who, for $50, will let the law firm use their name to bring a lawsuit against that individual to sue the company for having their sign in the wrong height. And of course, they don't care about that you're going to go run out and put it up 2 inches. They want $5,000 for the fact that you were doing it wrong. And they're just like a mill. And they're making a business out of this. So we've been working on legislation to I don't remember what the terminology of the bill is, but it's more or less that you can't bring ADA claims like that as a business. But suffice to say, there are people at the state that are watching for ADA compliance, but there are others out there too that are watching for it. So don't forget that that's an issue. And if you feel that you need updates to that, let us know, because we can bring people in to talk about ADA compliance, particularly when you're talking about older facilities and temporary facilities. Fireworks. How many of you have fireworks as part of your events? And again, that's an area that, of course, we have all the concerns about, will we be able to when the event actually happens, if there's a ban in our county or the governor issues a ban. But again, fireworks is one that absolutely is excluded from all general liability policies. They have to have pyrotechnics coverage, and there's a lot of requirements to get those policies put in place. So again, just be cognizant that when the chamber or the fire department comes and says, yeah, we took up donations, we've got the fireworks, and our guys are just going to shoot them off. Woo-hoo! They need to have specialized fireworks liability insurance in place to be able to do that. Or you just tell them, over there, not on our part of it. We're not advertising it as part of our event, but we want to have them.
We've had an official, the state fire marshal, give us, like, there's the list, and we have to have a certified person.
Right.
That's from their list.
Yeah. It's usually the smaller counties down south that I worry about that. They have people just come, the auto dealer comes in and says, I'm going to do this because I'm just a great guy. All of a sudden they're having illegal fireworks and the county's promoting. The other one beyond fireworks is how many of you have carnivals coming to your events. A couple years ago, I got a call from a risk manager at one of the cities that just wanted to warn me that their city event just had a bunch of kids trapped on a ride for several hours because the ride broke down, and they were really concerned about the condition of the kids once they got them off and stuff. And luckily, none of the kids were hurt real bad. But it just brought up this issue of, he said, I just wanted to warn you because when we went to check on with the vendor that we hired to do the carnival rides, the machine hadn't been inspected. There was no inspection whatsoever. You know, we figured we would find some kind of an inspection permit on the machine and stuff, and we asked him about it, and they said, well, no, there's no requirement to have any inspection. And he knew that they were leaving that city festival and going to one of our counties down south the very next day. And he said, I just wanted to warn you that this ride that we just had this big problem with is going to be on your county fairground next week. So I called the county, I talked to them, and through that process, I found out that Utah was one of 6 states in the union that doesn't require safety inspections of carnival rides until 2021, when the bill that passed this year goes into effect, and Utah will finally require inspections of carnival rides.
I'll stay off the rides until then.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the carnival owners recognize now that this is an issue, and they'll be a little bit more concerned even between now and 2021. But one of the other problems with that is, I said there were 6 states that didn't have requirements. 2 of the other states are Wyoming and Colorado, or New Mexico. So it's very possible that there are carnival companies that you're hiring that only operate in states where they don't need any inspections whatsoever. And talking with some of those carnival people at the legislature the last 2 sessions to work on this bill, some of these machines are from the 20s and 30s, and they still operate them. I was talking to one guy just last week, and he said, yeah, we've got this machine that's from the 30s, and when it breaks down, when a part actually breaks, we have to send in the diagrams and have a new piece machine. But we're not buying a new machine. We will build and manufacture new parts to fix it. We're not getting rid of the machine. So it's an issue. So again, the legislature, actually former Cache County Councilman Val Potter, who's now a representative at the legislature, he used to sell carnival equipment. That was his job for many years. He brought the bill, worked with Lagoon and Park City Mountain Resorts and others that have carnival rides permanently installed, and the carnival ride industry, and worked out the details of the bill that will now require that the state will put in place, and they put it under the Department of Transportation, which sounds very odd. In a lot of states, it's the Department of Ag, because most carnivals end up at fairs and events that Department of Agriculture is already involved in the state fair, right, or the county fairs. So that's there, but here, because the Department of Transportation already does all the safety inspections and permitting of the ski lifts, they felt that they were better suited, that somewhat similar. They convey people on a mechanical machine, so they placed it there, and they will, so over the course of between now and April of 2021, the state Department of Transportation will go through and write all the rules to, number one, train people who will then be inspectors. It won't be state inspectors. The state's just going to train inspectors. So anybody that wants to be can be a carnival ride inspector. So that's something that for some of you that are larger, that always regularly have carnivals in your county, could have one of your employees trained as a carnival ride inspector. And then the permit process, which includes requirements that they have to have certain insurance in place, and that's why Councilman Representative Potter got me involved, is to make sure that the insurance requirements of these carnival ride operators was adequate. And actually, after the fact, the governor appointed me to the committee at the Department of Transportation, as part of the committee who will go through the process of writing those rules. So for those of you that were concerned about will the rules be reasonable, adequate, and are we going to still be able to contract with carnival operators, or are they just gonna not want to operate in Utah anymore? I'm here to watch that and make sure that that done well. Marijuana. So, we got a couple years, but what are you gonna do when that first marijuana grower and sales group wants to have a booth at the fair? And wants to push the issue and distribute and sell at the fair? Have you dealt with that?
We want to know the CBD oil. These guys do cardboard things that we don't want to do that yet, but
Yeah. It's another one that I think definitely you want to go all the way to the top and have the county commission have set that policy that there are certain things that we will and will not allow to be sold at the fair. Tobacco, no. Cannabinoid oil, no. Whatever they feel is appropriate or not. Because Salt Lake Council, I'm sure, will say absolutely will sell cannabinoid oil at the county fair. Wayne County, probably not. Okay. But be prepared for it. And the county attorneys, we have another meeting tomorrow, right? On medical marijuana issues, because the county attorneys are struggling with how they are going to advise you on those marijuana issues. And luckily now the county's not actually going to be involved in the process of distributing, so we got that. It sounds like it anyway, that they're in session. They're supposed to get that done while they're in special session. But we still have all of those other issues of, are we going to have to deal with it as vendors at the fair and your employees and volunteers who will now come to work with marijuana, that they are using medical marijuana and show up to volunteer work. So your policies on whether or not they can be using that prescription drug while they're working at the fair is something you need to deal with through HR and the commission. And the law states you can only restrict and limit medical marijuana use to the same extent that you restrict or limit opioid use. So you need to go to your opioid use policy to determine whether or not you can restrict medical marijuana use. But again, we're working through the County Attorneys Association, trying to sort all those things out and the HR directors and stuff. But be prepared for that there are some things you guys are going to have to deal with when it comes to grass. Any ideas, any things that you guys had that you would have hoped we would talk about today that wasn't on the agenda? Any big concerns? Does concealed carry concern you? Our next speaker's going to talk about potential active events. With that comes the question of what do we do with concealed carry? Here in Utah, it's pretty hard to limit it, but and are we all comfortable with the amount of security and the coordination with the sheriff's office at our events? We got that nailed down real well.
I do have a question for you. I wrote down in your previous presentations about adding provisions for contracts that allow us to examine policies to be able to request that they provide these to us, and also require additional endorsements on those policies. Do you have any sample language that you sent out? Because I never included that in my contract.
I can probably find some that have that language in it and work with you on including that. But it's in that section where you're going to require a certificate of insurance or your compliance with the insurance requirements. You'd say certificate of insurance before you start the event is what the way most of them read. Oh, and at our request, you will provide any and all policies, endorsements, and other documents related to the insurance that's required. Something along those lines. Okay. Are we having problems with drug use at our events? Let's go one step
That we know
down
after.
from drug use. How many of you in the last 5-10 years have introduced alcohol sales at your events? I know some counties have.
We did
Had those
never
calls.
introduce it, but it's always been there. That's how the American Legion raises money for Boys State and Girls State. It's through alcohol sales at the fair. But we keep it pretty squashed. They can only drink inside the fairgrounds. They can't take it outside the arena. If their bags are searchable. If they are to bring in alcohol, it gets dumped out in front of them. Our sheriff's office is very highly active in that. So we keep it pretty tight.
Because I am getting the call almost every year now that one of the counties that we've never allowed it before, but we're trying to make some money here, and that can bring a lot of money in if we have beer sales at the fair. And again, okay, that's not a problem. You just need to, again, liquor liability is an entirely different coverage, a whole different policy, different requirements, training of the people who are going to serve. So if it's the American Legion guys that pour at the American Legion, no problem. But if they're going to have volunteers who don't have the proper permitting and licensing to be pouring alcohol, you need to be.
They bring us all their permits and everything a month in advance so that we can see that they're in order. And all their insurance and everything. We make them really jump through the hoops. And if they don't, you get right down to the signature, they don't sell.
Do you get any backlash from the community for selling alcohol? Like at a family fun event?
No, because,
It's always been that way, or have they
yeah,
always
the
done it?
American Legion has always done it and stuff. I mean, there was a lot of backlash when we didn't try and keep it contained inside the fairgrounds. We had a lot of complaints that way because there was people always out trying to drive while they were drunk, or they weren't paying attention. We had a lot of car accidents, backing accidents and stuff, but we keep it contained into the arena. They cannot leave the arena with any open containers.
Yeah, so how your facility is structured would really be a big question as far as should we introduce it or not. Physically, will you be able to separate things? Can you put the beer garden in a place where it's not right next to the kiddie rides type things, so that it's not quite as apparent to the family element as, if you have it over by the stage where the rock band's playing, it's probably a better place than next to the Donald Duck ride.
Well,
Just to think about those sorts of things.
The alcohol garden and the smoking area are in the same place. And the only complaint that we receive about them where they are is that it's where the handicap seating is.
Oh,
But we don't have much choice over that. I mean, we're all used up that way, but when we have events throughout the year in the event center that want to sell alcohol, we revert that back to the vendor who is renting the event center. They have to pay for the alcohol to be brought in, and they have to sign a waiver saying they indemnify Duchesne County, and we don't touch anything.
The hard thing is they're all bringing it in, and we all know it at our events, so it's horrible. I mean, not horrible.
Well, that's
but
where
I mean-
those signs come in.
Yeah, so it's like, we might as well sell it, that's where we're at too, it's like, it's
Right.
crazy what.
well, it's the we all know it. When we get people come, your volunteers are, are brought in and to do their depositions, and they say, well, yeah, we all know that they're bringing it in, and we all see it happening, but we put up the sign that says they can't, and that's all we do. Yeah, that's gonna be tough for us, because that's not enough. If that's the rule, no alcohol in the county fairgrounds, then you gotta be doing something to,
See,
you
we
know,
Keep it out.
look in the purse, look in the backpacks, do those sorts of things to some extent.
We even have problems with renting our buildings and people bringing it in, and it's an ordinance that there is no alcohol or no smoking at our fairgrounds. And you see on social media, they're posting pictures, it's at our grounds, you know, you see it, it's like, oh.
Because I did have commissioners call me from one of the counties that it was that very situation. Yeah, we rent out these facilities and we say no alcohol, but we're not gonna enforce it. We don't, it's okay if they rent our building and they're drinking in there. They're nice people, we like them, so we're not gonna enforce it. And I tell them, then get rid of the policy. Because especially when it's your policy that you have a choice on and you say no alcohol, and then you know that it's happening and you do not enforce it, that's way worse than having a policy that says, bring your liquor.
Yeah.
Just don't have a policy at all. Don't implement policies that you are not gonna enforce. That's what makes life difficult for Corey.
Tricky.
Well, and I don't know if the rest of you guys do what we do, but we have sheriff's deputies, we have 2 sheriff deputies or search and rescue guys at every gate that takes tickets. And they stay there all night long. And then we have the deputies that roam through the city. And so they always are looking for open containers to see if they can.
Yeah. And I just had this conversation with the Box Elder County Sheriff the other night before last. We were having dinner, and I asked him, because I went up to the Box Elder Fair for an afternoon. It was a huge turnout, and they've done a lot up there as far as improving the fairgrounds and things like that. And I asked him, so do they have to lock up half the county over the course of the week? He said, no, we had 6 incidences.
Really?
I mean, they have like 50,000 people show
And
up.
they still have that.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they have concerts and the big rodeo. They added all the grandstands that fit like an extra 20,000 people and sold it out. Huge event and 6 incidences. And he attributed that to exactly what you were saying. They were out there in full force. I drive up, parking lot, there's the sheriff's trailer. And there's 3 or 4 of them standing there right as you come in and you park. And as you walked around, there were sheriffs everywhere. And I think that most of the sheriffs would feel that way, that they would rather have the presence and help you keep anything from happening than have to deal with being called out to deal with the problem because they weren't there to help you search bags.
Well, and it's always a work in progress with the sheriff's department because they're either up or down employees, because they can't keep a full staff,
None of them are up.
Yeah. And they still have to take care of the rest of the county. And with us, we have, I don't know how many miles of, we're a large land county. We're a small population. Yes.
Do you have someone on site at your fairgrounds all the time?
All the time.
That's
We have the command center down there for emergency management.
Oh, sorry, not for sheriff, but I'm like during the year, like an employee that works right at the grounds all the time.
Yes.
Yes, okay.
But that's new. That's only 2 years new.
Is that,
Yeah, because vacancy is, we work with that because the coverage on the buildings themselves, almost any property policy says if that building is sitting vacant, which means less than 70% of it is being used, it's vacant and there's no coverage. Now we know that a lot of your buildings sit vacant, the restrooms at the parks, the fairground buildings and things like that. So we don't have that exclusion, but it's still a concern that the more that you can have people out at those buildings during the off season, checking on them or station somebody to work there, you One last comment before we get to our next speaker on little tidbits is Joanne brought up that they have liquor sales because it's the American Legion. They love the American Legion, and I'm sure that the American Legion regularly is giving money to different causes around the county. So what do you do next year when somebody else comes in and says, we want to have the beer garden? You, based on the Tooele County trying to sell their racetrack out there and the decision that the courts came up with that, hey, it isn't just when you purchase something you have to take the lowest dollar. When you sell something, you have to take the highest dollar. So if you have those types of relationships with things, consider that if somebody else comes and says they're willing to pay the county more for letting them have the beer garden, you better be talking with the county attorney's office, because you may have to take the highest. If you haven't stripped it out what the obligations are for that, you may have to sell it to the highest bidder, no matter how palatable they are to the community or not.
Well, I don't know if we made that a problem or it will be a problem or whatever. So far that hasn't happened with us. We haven't had anybody approach, but living in a rural county is a lot different than having the facilities in the cities where you need to do that. It's not that we wouldn't handle it the same. Somebody came in and said, you wanted it, but the exception to that is that when the American Legion is done selling alcohol, so it will.
That may be the policy decision. With all of these things, and when you're selling things, like if you're gonna, okay, we're not gonna let people store in our building for the winter, but there's a local guy that wants to lease the building, and he's gonna sell out spaces in it. Again, that's something now that you probably want to put together an RFP and take, and bid it out. Who's willing to pay you the most to use your building as a self-storage for the winter? So just something that I figured you guys wouldn't have thought of, that you should be considering that.
I do have a question for everyone though. How many days is your fair? How many days long? 4?
Most,
Ours are like, it'll blow your mind. It's like 10 days.
yeah.
Takes two to get there.
Yeah.